Now the subject of today's discussion is the life, and more than life, the teachings and the philosophical ideas of three of the greatest thinkers and prophets that India has produced: Buddha, Shankaracharya and Swami Vivekananda. Now, of these three great thinkers, in chronological order, the Buddha comes first. Buddha was born around 626 BC and lived for 80 years. That is one estimate. According to another estimate, he was born in 560 BC and passed away in 480 BC. So total a lifespan of 80 years. Shankaracharya was born in 778 AD and passed away in 810, 32 years. And Swamiji lived between 1863 and 1902, around 39 years and a few months. Now there is a gap of nearly 12 centuries between Buddha and Shankaracharya, and nearly 11 centuries between Shankaracharya and Vivekananda. As a coincidence, you find the social and cultural setting in which these three great thinkers and philosophers lived was almost identical. Both were revolutionaries. In the context of their times, the way they reacted to the cultural and social forces of their contemporary times, all the three were great revolutionaries in a much deeper and meaningful sense than the modern political revolutionaries whom we normally read about and hear about. Buddha's mission was not so much as to give shape to a distinct philosophical system as to give a moral teaching, a moral code to his age. And his teachings were given in Prakrit language, which is a primitive type of vernacular, not very different from Sanskrit, but the Prakrit itself means unrefined. So it was a kind of unrefined vernacular in which Buddha spoke, and that was the language which the common masses of his times understood. So he was more of a man of the masses. Though four great schools of philosophy evolved on the basis of Buddha's teachings 600 years after his passing away, Buddha himself was not a philosopher in the sense Kant or Hegel or Shankaracharya or even Vivekananda was a philosopher. Now, with regard to Shankaracharya, philosophy was the tool which he used to work out his mission. And in Swamiji, you find the philosophy of Shankaracharya given a purely humanistic interpretation. Swamiji was the one who humanized, who rather gave a humanistic interpretation of the philosophy of Upanishads, which Shankaracharya preached and taught. And before Shankaracharya, Buddha actually taught without acknowledging it. That's the main difference. I shall just come to these three thinkers one after another. As I said earlier, Buddha was born, let us say, 7th century BC. Of course, or 6th century BC. There are 2-3 schools of thought with regard to the historicity of Buddha and his life. In that, as a philosopher, we can say he was perhaps a contemporary of Thales of the Milesian school, who lived around 200 years before Socrates. He originally belonged to Miletus, is a part of Asia Minor, and who taught that the fundamental stuff of which the world is created is water. That is his thesis. Now, with regard to Buddha, what he did was, he took all the message from the Upanishads, but didn't give a philosophical structure to it, gave it a purely moralistic and humanistic interpretation. He first looked around the world, observed the human life, the life of the common man in the streets, and then he came to the conclusion that there is sorrow everywhere. See, the two approaches. Shankaracharya taught that Brahman is ultimate reality and Brahman is knowledge absolute, consciousness absolute, and bliss absolute. And the same Advaita philosophy was interpreted by Swami Vivekananda in the 19th century in the context of modern man, in the context of socialism, communism, utilitarianism, and pragmatism of William James and Bergson and others. But in Buddha you find a concern for the problems of man living in the street. That is how he actually became a prophet. He was born as a prince of a small kingdom in Nepal, not the whole of Nepal country, but it's a very small nation, a portion of Nepal. And it was predicted about him that he would become an emperor, a big conqueror. And another prediction said that he would become a mendicant. So there were two predictions by astrologers at the time of his birth. Anyhow, his father saw to it that he never had any access to the miserable aspect of human life. So he was brought up in luxury, and he was married, he had a son, and one day, as he was passing through the streets, he comes across two types of people. One, a sick man, other, a dying man. And then again he went ahead. Then he came across two other types of people. An old man walking with misery and pain and grief in his eyes and in his face. And then he saw a procession moving in the streets. A dead body was being taken to the cremation ground. So his charioteer, his servant, told him, this man won't live any longer. He is going away from this world. Then only the young man, who was 28 years old and was a prince too, understood that there is such a thing as death in human life. And that night he left his palace, his wife, Yasodhara, and a small child, Rahula, and his kingdom and comforts, and he went in search of the ultimate truth. And the journey took him to a place in today's northern India. It's called Bodh Gaya in Bihar state. There he sat, and while sitting he took a strong determination. Even if my body perishes away, I shall not leave this seat till I get the supreme wisdom, which is the answer, the only remedy for the griefs of mankind. Because he had seen 4 types of pains or miseries or griefs. The sick man, the dead man or the dying man, the old man, and the poor man walking in the streets. It is also said in one of his biographies, Ashwagosha's Buddha Vijaya, it is stated, he also saw the face of a yogi. This is the 2-3 stories. I want to give the full picture. According to some of his historians, it is also stated that he saw a great monk, a sannyasi or yogi, sitting in the streets, and in his face there was no sorrow, no grief. So the only face that he saw without grief and sorrow was the face of a monk, a mendicant. So that made him come to the conclusion that only way out of this world of misery and sorrow is the life of a mendicant. That's one story. Anyhow, with this strong determination, he sat under a tree, and for many years he did penance. His famous biographer, Ashwagosha, gives a graphic picture of how Buddha took this strong resolution, determination, and sat under the tree. Ihasane sushyadu me shariram tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yatuhu aprapya siddhim bahujanma durlabham naivasanar kayamatas chalishyate. This is a Sanskrit verse. I shall translate in English. I am going to sit under this tree. I won't get up from here till I get the supreme wisdom, till I get the supreme enlightenment. Let my body perish. Let the entire world collapse in front of me. Still, I won't get up from here till I get a complete answer to the problems of this world, to the miseries of the common man living around me. This is the determination he took. And in course of time, it is said that he got enlightenment. He went about preaching. And his teachings consisted of 4 noble truths. One is, there is grief in this world, sorrow. Because everywhere you find people lose their health. So separation from something positive, something which is pleasant. And they get old. So the man gets something which he doesn't want, old age. He falls sick, he gets something, sickness, disease, which he doesn't want. So what is unpleasant comes to you, and what is pleasant leaves you. It is samyoga viyoga, as Buddha called. Separation and also joining. Separation from what is pleasant and the unwelcome intrusion of something which is unpleasant. So Buddha said this is dukkha. He called dukkha, means grief or sorrow. And the second noble truth was this. There is a cause for this sorrow. There is a reason for it. Buddha believed in the theory of cause and effect. Everything is caused by something. If you remove the cause, then you can remove the effect as well. And the cause of this grief, the third noble truth is desire. Man's attachment to worldly pleasures. If you can get rid of desire, if you can get rid of attachment to this psychophysical mechanism, we can get rid of this problem of grief or sorrow. Now, how to achieve it? Buddha said the way to get out of this net of sorrow or grief is nirvana. We call cessation of the causes, means complete cessation of desire, and that is possible through meditation and contemplation. And then one gets out of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, which constitute the endless cycle of cause and effects, of which man is a part. So these are the four noble truths which he taught. And further elaborating the fourth one, how to achieve nirvana, Buddha enumerated eightfold paths. It is called Ashtanga Yoga, it sometimes called. Samyak Drishti, Samyak Sankalpa, Samyak Vak, Samyak Kriya, etc. First, Samyak Drishti, the right view of the world. We should not be too much attached to anything in this world. Perfect equanimity, an objective outlook towards things. And we must have a proper resolution, proper determination. We should have a proper understanding of what life actually means, what to aspire for in life. And then Buddha realized that the most common mechanism through which man interacts with the external world is speech. So right speech, samyak vak, that is called, right speech. And speech follows action. So Buddha said we must have the right kind of action. Our activities, our conduct should be based on certain fundamental moral principles and moral ideas. And then we must have a proper livelihood. How we carry on with our daily activities, the basis of our support. And then the right kind of action, the right kind of effort, via samyak vyayama. Livelihood he called ajiva, and effort he called vyayama. So samyak vyayama means the right type of effort. Man's effort should be in the proper direction. All the problems, all the grief, all the miseries that we experience in life are due to wrong word, wrong speech, wrong resolution, wrong view of the world, wrong approach and attitude towards the world, and wrong conduct and wrong type of effort. So we must have the right view, the right speech, the right action, the right way of earning our livelihood, the right conduct, and the right effort. And then samyak smriti, our mental cognition, recollection, all will be automatically proper if we perform all the 6 previous actions properly. And then 8th one is very important, samyak samadhi. Proper contemplation, proper meditation. If a sincere aspirant follows all the 7-fold paths enumerated earlier, he will automatically reach the last point, that is called samyak samadhi. If one practices these 8 steps, if he follows this 8-fold path, after a proper understanding of the reality of grief around, one will get away from the clutches of cause and effect, law of karma, and this endless cycle of life, work, death, rebirth, and again continuation of this endless cycle. Because Buddha explains the human life in the form of a cycle. Now, where do we begin a cycle? A cycle has no beginning, no end, and no middle. It is caused by ignorance. Buddha uses the term avidya or ajnanam as used in other systems of Indian thought. And this avidya expresses itself in the form of undesirable attachment towards things, a desire for things which naturally bring grief to our life. If this is removed, then its effect also will be removed. Effect is grief, and the cause is ignorance, and that ignorance takes the form of desire for unpleasant things, which naturally bring grief. So this is the essence of Buddha's teachings. Now I will come to the next phase of Buddhist philosophy. Buddha passed away after leading a full life. He lived for 80 years. He went round different parts of the world. And in 3rd century BC, a great revolutionary event took place in the history of Buddhist religion and Buddhist thought. There was a great war, and the victor of that war was Ashoka the Great. In fact, according to great historians like Toynbee, Will Durant and others, the greatest man who ever reigned over a kingdom, the greatest king or emperor the world had ever heard of or seen. That is Ashoka the Great. His greatness was not that he was a great conqueror. In fact, he was a great conqueror. But when he understood, when he realized the misery that he brought to millions of people because of his warlike ambitions, he became a convert to the ideal of non-violence. And he became a Buddhist, and he sent emissaries all over the world, to Alexandria, to Macedonia, to Sri Lanka, and to to China, and to many parts of Far Eastern Asia of those times. In fact, most of the civilized world of that age received the message of non-violence through the emissaries sent by Ashoka the Great. So Buddhism became a world religion. But from 1st or 2nd century AD onwards, a new trend began to develop among Buddhists. Buddha, who himself was not a philosopher in the true sense of the term, inspired many great intellectuals who became Buddhists, and they gave shape to many new philosophical doctrines. 4 schools of Buddhism developed it's called the later phase of the evolution of Buddhist thought. One is Vijnanavada and Shunyavada, the 2 schools of Buddhist idealism, and Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, the 2 schools of Buddhist realism. Both belong to the Mahayana and Hinayana sects. And according to many historians, though there are different views, John the Baptist and the great ascetics living along the Dead Sea Scrolls, from whom Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the Dead Sea, belonged to a sect of Buddhist monastics, Buddhist monks, and the Essenes actually were a sect of the ancient Buddhist monks called Theravada. In fact, this view is put forward by many of the modern historians. Of course, there are different views. I won't go deeper into this subject. For your future investigation, I leave it to you. Now, these 4 schools of thought developed among the Buddhists. Now, Shankaracharya was born, as I said earlier, in 778 AD. Now, what was the philosophical climates, the cultural and social conditions of Shankara's time? That's what I'm going to next. He again, as I said, just as Buddha, Shankara too was a great revolutionary, a great nonconformist who had to fight against every kind of old conservative orthodox schools of thought, and also many of the social customs and conventions which actually took man away from the mainstream of morality and also cultural life. Now, when Shankara was born, Buddhism had almost completed around 1100 years of existence. And as it happens to many religious sects, Buddhism had reached the nadir of degradation and degeneration by the time Shankara was born. The later schools of Buddhism interpreted Buddhist philosophy as a philosophy of voidness, the emptiness. Buddha gave a positive message to mankind. But that positive message was interpreted in purely negative terms by later Buddhist thinkers like Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, Asanga, and so on. I'm not going to those details now. Within a limited span of time, I can't do full justice to these systems of thought. And again, Buddhism also had imbibed the customs of the barbarian races who attacked India from time to time from Central Asia and other places. They're called Hunas. Just as Rome was invaded by the barbarian races who moved from the east, and how we all know how what happened to Rome in the 3rd century AD, just at the time of Constantine. Rome was attacked and destroyed, and the Western Roman Empire completely collapsed in front of the barbarian invaders who attacked Rome from the east. Now, similarly, a segment of the same race moved towards India, and they brought with them their own barbarian culture, their conventions, blood sacrifices, human sacrifices, all these diabolical customs and practices. And they all became Buddhists. But when they became Buddhists, they did not fully accept the great spiritual teachings of Buddha, like non-violence and all. Instead, they just brought with them their own conventions and customs, which were highly diabolical. Human sacrifices, blood rituals, all these which were practiced by the barbarian races of Central Asia. They brought with them all, and they all became Buddhists. So Buddhism became so degraded and degenerate, and it was during this time that Shankaracharya was born. So on the one hand, Shankaracharya had to fight with the degenerate form of Buddhism, and on the other hand, he had to confront the onslaughts of the old conservative, orthodox, traditional ritualists of Vedic religion, who believed that there is no philosophy in the Vedas. You need not worry about any great spiritual or metaphysical ideal. If you just follow certain rituals mechanically, without thinking about a God or an ultimate cause or a final cause or the fundamental moral principles or transcendental values, if you just perform mechanically some rituals, that is enough. There is nothing more to religion. In fact, that is the essence of Vedas. This was the path followed by the extreme conservative ritualists. They are called the Mimamsakas. That is particular the school of ritualism. In the philosophical tradition, it is called the Mimamsa school of philosophy. So on the one hand, Shankaracharya had to confront the degenerate form of Buddhism. On the other hand, the extremely orthodox and conservative ritualists of the Vedic religion, who denied everything transcendental, who were pure utilitarians. They were the forerunners of utilitarianism or Epicureanism. Now again, there were many other schools of thought, like Sankhyas, Naiyayikas, and the school of logicians, and the school of dualists, and Shankaracharya had to confront with all of them. So the only way out, the only way to save the great philosophical ideas, the spiritual tradition of the Upanishad literature, was to evolve a system of thought, or rather to interpret the entire Upanishad literature according to the philosophy of Advaita or non-dualism, which Swami Vivekananda brought to America 1100 years later. So, Swami, I will come to Swamiji later, but to understand, to appreciate what Shankaracharya did, I shall just invite you, I shall take you to 19th century. Now, when Swamiji came to America, you find in his earlier talks, in the Chicago address and later talks, Swamiji doesn't mention anything about any of these ritualistic philosophies or the old Buddhist doctrine. Swamiji mostly talks about a universal religion and its practical dimension. A religion which believes that the entire creation is one. The entire creation is one spiritual family. It says the infinite oneness of the soul is the eternal sanction of all morality, all ethics, and all good actions. Swamiji asserts again and again that a purely monotheistic religion, however great it might be, cannot satisfy the ultimate questions posed by modern materialists, neo-positivists, or even communists of that age. Though communism had not become a political ideology, still it was very much alive as a political philosophy rather. Not an ideology, but a philosophy. So Swamiji discovered that the educated Western people are willing to accept only a philosophy of religion which doesn't accept a God who creates this world and divides mankind into two conflicting groups of believers and non-believers, sending believers to heaven and non-believers to hell. So Swamiji presented before the Western audience a religious philosophy which was actually the Advaita philosophy which Shankaracharya formulated 1100 years earlier. The main difference is Shankaracharya had to concentrate on the metaphysical aspects of the philosophical system. The need for a humanistic interpretation did not arise at that time. What was needed was a philosophical consolidation of the fundamental principles of Upanishadic philosophy, which he did in a most superhuman way. Remember, when he was 6 years and 8 months, he left his home to become a mendicant and walked 1700 kilometers, roughly about, say, about 1,100 miles, and reached a forest on the bank of a river, met his guru. He had already studied all the 4 Vedas, Upanishads, all Shastras which are known to mankind at that time, in India of course, in Indian context. But he felt he had not completed his education. And then he met his guru walking 1700 kilometers from his home and reached the banks of a river, met a great old teacher who was at that time 90 years old, 91 years old, Govinda Bhagavad Pada is called. Met him and lived with him. This boy of 7 years lived with him for nearly 8 years. No, not 8, nearly around 7 years he lived with him and completed his studies. And then before he was 14 years, his teacher asked him to write elaborate commentaries, treatises, philosophical treatises on all the well-known Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra. And he did not only that, after completing this work, he traveled all over India 4 times. Remember, that is 8th century AD. Even today, if you walk all the way from extreme southern tip of India to Badrinath, you'll be terribly tired. Even if you could take a plane to Dehradun and then travel 315 kilometers to Badrinath, you'll be terribly tired. And this boy of 14, 15 years walked 4 times all over India. Not only he wrote the greatest philosophical treatises known to mankind, he also is the author of the most sublime, the most beautiful devotional hymns in Sanskrit language, which many of our nuns, many of our devotees chant from time to time. The Nityananda Gari that you chanted in Shanti Ashrama is great. So the author of the greatest philosophical treatises and the most sublime, beautiful, no less than 37 devotional hymns, According to some other estimate, many more. And not only that, he refined the ways of worship prevailing in different temples. There were many temples in India at that time where diabolical rituals were performed. He stopped all that. He refined all these devotional practices. And he defeated all the antagonists belonging to different philosophical schools of his time. And he established 4 great monasteries at 4 corners of India, and had a number of disciples, and that tradition still continues. And he organized 10 distinct orders of monks. You can imagine, this was at least around 450 years before the birth of St. Francis. 10 distinct monastic orders. With all these he completed within 32 years and passed away. Now Swamiji came in 19th century. Now what was the task before Swamiji? There is a great difference between the climate, the social, the cultural, the philosophical climate of Buddha's time and Shankara's time. There's a greater difference, in fact. There's a greater difference between the conflicts between the climate, the philosophical and cultural setting of 8th century AD and 19th century AD. Swamiji came at a time when the world was coming closer. The world was actually becoming one global family. And not only that, Swamiji had to work in a post-industrial age, the age of materialism, the age of scientific and technological innovations, and the age of post-colonial adventures. So Swamiji had, and not only that, still more important, that was the age which had started questioning the very relevance of religion and religious philosophies as a whole. 2 great events took place just before Swamiji's birth. One was the publication of Origin of Species by Darwin. The other was the publication of Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. Engels, Marx on the one hand and Darwin on the other, they together questioned the very relevance, the very necessity of anything you call religion or God or spirituality in the world. So the foundations of monotheistic religion had already started shaking. Not because the founders of these religions were wrong, but because the interpreters, later followers, departed from the mainstream, from the fundamental teachings of the great founders of these monotheistic religions. So Swamiji had to give a new religion to the Western world. But that was not a new religion so far as India was concerned. So far as India was concerned, it was a consolidation and reinterpretation of the ancient Upanishadic philosophy. But so far as the Western world was concerned, it was a new approach to the very fundamental questions of human life. Not from an ontological point of view, where life comes from, what's the ultimate meaning of human life, who is God, what is the origin of the universe. All these questions could not get a satisfactory answer from monotheistic religions. So Swamiji interpreted Advaita from 2 different angles. From a philosophical angle, he called it universal religion. And from a practical angle, he called it practical Vedanta. So, from a philosophical angle, Swamiji stresses again and again that a true religion cannot be confined within the 4 walls of a book or a doctrine, a place of worship, a set of rituals, and a strong belief in a particular individual, whether he is a prophet or a priest. Swamiji says these four elements are necessary, no doubts. Swamiji doesn't reject them. So, and in his famous statement, it is good to be born in a church, but it is terrible to die there. Church here stands for formalistic religion. Every day we believe a particular book, we read a particular book, we go to a particular place of worship, and we follow certain rituals. This is religion, nothing more, nothing less. These things are necessary. Swamiji doesn't reject it. Neither Shankara nor Buddha nor any of the great Vedic rishis ever rejected formalistic religion. They only insisted that we must go beyond formalistic religion. Here I must point out one important point, because especially to the students of Buddhist philosophy. We must, though it is generally believed that Buddha did not openly acknowledge the authenticity of Vedic literature, there are several statements in the Nikaya literature, in the Tripitaka literature, where Buddha makes statements which reveal his strong faith in the in a spiritual heritage. For example, I follow the path of the all-seeing seers of the past. And sometimes Buddha makes many statements. We resemble, I come to fulfill, not to destroy, that great teaching of Jesus Christ. The same idea you find in many of statements made by Buddha, which shows, as Swamiji stressed, reminds us again and again, that Buddhism was an offshoot of Hinduism, Vedic religion, and Buddha was a child of Hinduism, a rebel child. Swamiji called Buddha as a rebel child. Buddhism was a rebel child. Maybe a rebellious, little rebellious, but still a child of Upanishadic or Vedic religion. Now, coming to Swamiji again, Swamiji had to interpret the traditional Vedantic philosophy in a new language. There is a shifting of emphasis in Swamiji's statements. For example, I shall give just a few examples. We don't have much time, I think, a few more minutes, yes. There are three important Advaitic tenets which Swamiji reinterprets to suit the needs of modern times. One is the idea the world is mithya. Mithya means relative, sometimes translated as illusion. But what actually it implies is relative, not absolute reality. In many places, Swamiji almost verbatim repeats Shankaracharya's definition of Maya or Mithya. Swamiji says, it neither existence nor non-existence, it is not complete zero, not complete existence. All these statements Swamiji makes again and again. And at the practical level, Swamiji tells us how it works in the daily life of an ordinary man. A mother who looks after the child, knowing fully well that child is going to be a big problem. And very often we cannot shake off our attachment to many things which we know very well bring only misery to our life. So this a total helplessness, the feeling that we are part of something which we cannot shake off and which only brings misery to the world, and which can be shaken off only when we realize that there is a supreme reality which is beyond all this. Such ideas are repeated again and again by Swamiji, which read like almost English translation of some of the statements in Vivekachudamani and other works of Shankaracharya. But at the same time, Swamiji stresses that world is an illusion, no doubt. It is mithya, but you need not run away from it. In fact, that is a new interpretation, revolutionary interpretation which Swamiji gives to suit the modern times. The difference between 8th century and 19th century we can find here. Swamiji says the world is relative, in the sense it is an illusion. It is not an absolute reality. But we need not reject it as mithya. Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. So the world is a gymnasium for us to work out our karmas. This is the essence of practical Vedanta. The world is an illusion, no doubt, but then he says world is a gymnasium for us to work out our karmas. We don't go and live in a gymnasium. We use gymnasium to get health and strength, to get rid of some bodily problems and all that. So also live in this world and make use of this life in this world. And how to make use of it? By serving the man living next door to you. So, the Advaita philosophy, which found its philosophical, spiritual and metaphysical zenith in Shankara's works, finds a new expression in Swamiji's words, which Swamiji called practical Vedanta. The world is an illusion, but don't run away. Live in this world and try to make use of your life in this world for your own spiritual goods. Instead of running away, use it as a tool, as an instrument for your own spiritual fulfillment. If the entire creation is an expression of the divine spirit, then there is nobody, nothing in this world in which the divine spirit doesn't exist. So if you serve the man living next door to you, that is the greatest practice of Advaita. So you find there's a famous statement in Practical Vedanta. The human soul is the Taj Mahal of temples. Taj Mahal is supposed to be a very beautiful architectural model, mind you. Though it is more like a cremation ground, it's a human dead body is cremated. But still, on the other hand, it is a symbol of beauty and charm and attractiveness. So Swamiji says, instead of confining your religious life to rituals, going to a church or a temple or any place of worship, do that, but at the same time, there's a greater way to worship God, and that is to serve God living in every living being. That's why Swamiji insisted, in Indian context, he insisted that we must work for the uplift of the masses, to spread education among the poor people, to eradicate social injustices, and to bring material prosperity. And he was perhaps the first spiritual teacher who insisted that whatever may be the greatness of his spiritual heritage, without material prosperity, you cannot survive in this world. An individual may attain moksha, liberation, but society cannot survive just by spiritual values. It needs material prosperity, scientific, technological development, organization skill, leadership skill, hard work, punctuality, and fruits of modern science and technology. At the same time, one should not become a slave to the forces of science and technology. One should also imbibe spiritual values, because science and technology cannot teach us how to make proper use of the tools of science and technology. Only spirituality and religious ideal can teach us how to make proper use of science and technology. So in Swamiji you find a harmony or a synthesis or a blending of the best of the Occidental and best of the Advaita tradition of the Oriental. On the one hand, science, technology, organization, leadership skill, hard work, punctuality, and on the other hand, the great spiritual truth underlying the Advaita philosophy. That means the entire creation is one. God is an indweller in every living being, not only in human beings, everywhere. God is omnipresent, omniscient, transcendent, and also immanent. These four dimensions, which are the pillars of Advaita philosophy, Swamiji brought to the Western world. And again, he interpreted Advaita as a universal religion, not as a elliptic, a kind of a combination of all the doctrines of all religions in the world. Rather, the essence of all religion, whether organized religions or non-organized religions, is spirituality, the divinity of human being. And man is essentially divine. you should try to strive to express this divinity, manifest the divinity. Either you can do it by converting your daily work into worship. Then every work becomes a worship, every moment becomes a worship, and every thought becomes a meditation. Whole life becomes a spiritual sadhana. Or by surrendering to God, bhakti yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, or by constant contemplation on the oneness of the reality of soul, that is jnana yoga, or by control of internal and external nature. And if one practices any of these paths or all of these paths, depending upon his temperament, one can realize the truth that existence is one, the entire humanity is one spiritual family, and God is the immanent reality, the indweller in every living being. It is omnipresent, omniscient, transcendent, and above all that God is the Atman, the Brahman, which is indweller, which is immanent, not only in human beings, but in entire creation. So, this was the interpretation which Swamiji gave to the Upanishadic philosophy, which was interpreted purely on humanistic terms by Buddha, and in spiritual and metaphysical terms by Shankaracharya. And Swamiji gave it an interpretation which every thinking individual modern times, no matter which religion you belong to, or even to not only a conventional believer, but even a non-believer, a man who doesn't believe in God, also can be spiritual if he understands the truth of Advaita, interpreted as universal religion by Swami Vivekananda. I think I have already exceeded the time allotted. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.